Welcome to Webinar 7 in our 12-part Value Gap series. My name is John Heck, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Michael Clark. Here's an interesting question I'd like to start with today. If I told you that one of your top 3 employees is quietly entertaining a conversation with a competitor right now, what would that actually cost you? I don't mean in terms of replacing them necessarily. I mean in terms of what your business is worth when you eventually go to sell it.
And the interesting thing, John, is that you and I both know that this is the question that most business owners never ask.
Right.
And it's one that matters a lot, right? And we're going to go through this because if you're planning an exit at any point in time, and I've said this before, and I'll remind you that whether you exit voluntarily or involuntarily, you will exit your business. And if these individuals that we're going to talk about today, if they leave, it could affect your business.
So before we dive too far into this, I want to just cover a quick compliance note as we're required to do. Everything that Mike and I discussed today, as always, is educational in nature. It is not specific financial, tax, or legal advice. Your situation and the details of your business are unique to you. And anything that we cover here should be reviewed with your personal advisory team before you act on it. We're here today to give you a framework. We're not here looking to replace any of your advisors.
And as always, we're going to make you a deal, right? We have 2 goals in the time that we're together today. Obviously, the first one is, as always, we want to give you something that is generally useful, that not only can you take away today with some knowledge to implement into your business, but also questions that you could go to that advisory team that John just mentioned and start asking better questions. So the framework that we're going to go over today is called VEST. It's the VEST protocol. And once again, you can take into your own situation and apply it today. Goal 2 is that if we deliver on that first goal in terms of providing that value and giving you something genuinely useful, we are going to ask you to have a conversation with us at the end. It's a complimentary value gap assessment where we get into your situation and point, whoops, hit all the slides there. We're going to get you, kind of pointed in the right direction to see where the gaps are at and help make introductions to fill those gaps. So you start taking action today to optimize your business. So today is specifically for business owners running 2 million or more in EBITDA who are thinking about an exit. Once again, you should be thinking about an exit. But if you're not, it's no problem. We're going to start that process. And so I want you to get locked in for the next 30, 40 minutes, because what we're going to cover could be worth significantly more than the time you're investing in right now. And so before I tell you what we're going to cover before we actually go through this, I want to share some things that our clients have told us that actually prevent them from taking action. And I'm not saying this is you. I'm not saying these are the preconceived notions in your head, and these aren't all of them. But John and I want to put these on the table because not taking action is the worst thing you can do for your business. And if we get some of these myths out of the way, our hope is that you'll take that next step. And whether it's with us or somebody else, just taking action. So the first objection is this: my key people are loyal. They're not going anywhere. They have been with me for years. And I promise you, we hear this all the time. And here is the hard truth that you may not want to hear. Loyalty is not a retention plan. Loyalty is not a feeling, because feelings change. People do things that are going to better their family and better their position. Never mind the handshake or the loyalty that you think they have, especially when a competitor shows up with a larger check.
Well, that's for sure. And in my experience, the owners who feel most confident about employee loyalty are often the ones who have done the least formal retention planning with their key people. The confidence itself can be a blind spot. Have you seen that as well, Mike?
Absolutely, right? And the problem is that, which goes to objection 2, which I can't afford to give away equity, right? And that creates that blind spot because, look, you built the company, and I understand the feeling that you're not giving over ownership to the employees. I understand that. Here is what we want you to know going into this conversation. Most of what we're going to cover today does not require giving away a single share of your company. There are sophisticated structures designed specifically for the situation to uncover those blind spots and actually create mutually beneficial relationships and retain key employees. Objection 3, we're too small for this to matter. These plans are for big companies. Look, you guys are significant size at 2 million right now or more in EBITDA. And at some point in time, when you exit your business, you're going to need these things in place. So it's not a matter of you being too small. It's just a matter of you taking action and getting things in writing and the clarity to move forward. So you are exactly the right size for this conversation. Buyers at your level scrutinize key person risk the same way they do at any level.
An objection 4, Mike, is my attorney handles all of this, so we're good. And that may very well be true. Your attorney is capable of absolutely drafting a retention agreement. But here's an important question to ask. Is that agreement designed around your exit timeline? Is it designed around your current tax picture, your valuation goals? Or is it simply a standalone document that no one else on your team has ever reviewed? Those are two very, very different things.
And the big one, and this goes with financial planning, this goes with a lot of things, estate planning, business planning, anything. I've thought about it. I just never got around to it. Now, this one, we're going to come back to again and again, because the cost of not getting around to it is the part most owners underestimate, because when you get to the end, there is no option because you don't have time. So before we get into the meat of this whole thing, obviously, we always want to tell you who we are. So there's some context and why we're doing this. I came from the investment banking side, helped business owners raise a combined $42 million and complete my MBA along the way. But here's what I noticed in all of that work. Business owners had gaps, and they're real gaps. They had gaps in their financials, in their operations, in their planning, and the advisors around them were never talking to each other to make sure those gaps were filled. The CPA was doing the CPA's job, which is tax prep and file. The attorney was doing the attorney's job, charging a lot of money. The wealth manager was doing the wealth manager's job, if the business owner even had a financial advisor or wealth manager. But the bottom line is nobody was coordinating that team to close those gaps. And so what we did in building the National Referral Network was to help fill those gaps. And the difference between the ultra high net worth individuals and Main Street business owners is not intelligence or work ethic. It is that ultra high net worth people have a team working together, so all of the financial pieces are moving in the same direction instead of against each other. That is why we are building for owners in this conversation. We want to create more clarity, we want to create more coordination, and at the end, we want to create better outcomes.
And once again, my name is John Heck. I'm also a wealth manager at Avior Wealth Management. I have more than 35 years experience helping my clients acquire, protect, and transfer wealth, both on the personal and the business sides of planning. And I guess you could say that my superpower, if there is such a thing, is helping clients understand how financial, tax, legal, insurance, and estate planning considerations all fit together like one big puzzle. I'm a huge advocate for coordinating my clients' attorneys, accountants, insurance professionals, and other advisors to make sure that everyone is working from the same sheet of music, as I like to say. If you have seen any of our previous webinars, you already know how rare that is in the real world. And unfortunately, Mike, I see that as a failure of the industry.
Ooh, we talked about this. We'll do a webinar on that. Failure
Yes.
of the industry. I'm sure the industry is going to love that. It'll be like it'll be like the Jerry Maguire memo.
That's right.
Who's coming with me? It's just you and I, John. It'll just be you and I. So here's what Here's what John and I want you to understand going into the content of today is that most business, I keep thinking of that, the industry thing. Most business owners think about employee retention the same way they think about HR, right? You put together a comp plan, you try to build a good culture, you maybe throw in some benefits, and you hope people stay. And that is the scorecard most owners are using. Here's the problem with that scorecard, though. It absolutely measures the wrong thing.
It does. And I'll put a number on that. When a buyer is evaluating a business, they're running what's called a key person analysis. And what they're doing is they're asking if one or two of these critical people leave post acquisition, what happens to the revenue of the business? And I want you to think about this as if you were the buyer yourself. And I'm sure you'd probably do the same thing. What happens to operations? What happens if what is the probability of disruption to the overall business? And then the buyer is going to apply a discount to the purchase price that reflects what they perceive as that risk. And in our experience, that discount can range anywhere from 10% to 30% of the enterprise value, depending on the concentration of that risk. It's definitely not chump change and something you definitely want to pay attention to.
So that's a lot of money. So here's the reframe that I want you to sit with for a second, right? John just talked about 10 to 30% of the enterprise value. So retention is not an HR problem. Retention is a valuation problem. The day a key person walks out of your door, your enterprise value drops. Not eventually, not maybe, the day it happens. And it costs you more than just the valuation. There's a lot that goes into a key person leaving your company. And the people who need to design the solution are not your HR directors or your HR consultant. They're not the attorney. That they're all working in separate rooms. This is your entire advisory team working from the same exit goal framework that you create, right? Now, if you don't have one, that's a different thing. So that is the paradigm shift that we want to help get over today. And the framework we're going to use to make this real is called the VEST protocol. There are 4 layers to it. There's the valuation impact. There's eligibility design. There's structure selection. And then there's team alignment. Each one builds on the last. And by the time we're done today, you're going to have a clear picture of where you stand on each one of these layers.
I'd like to point out that the VEST protocol that Mike's talking about, this is not a product in and of itself. It's not something that we can sell to you. It's a diagnostic framework, and we're going to walk you through it today so that whether you work with us or not in the future, you're going to leave here today with a much clearer picture of your own situation.
So here's what I want to ask before we go any farther, right? If we can show you a structure, specific way to address this that does not require giving up equity, that works with your existing advisors, and that has a direct and measurable impact on the exit value of your business, are you willing to at least to consider it, to go through these exercises open-minded and consider the possibility? That's all we're asking you to do. Is that fair? Perfect. So as always, want to describe 2 business owners. These are composites. Because of compliance, we can't give you specifics. But the first profile is an owner who has thought about retention, but handled it informally. Maybe they gave key employee a raise last year. Maybe they had a conversation or 2 about the future of that employee, what they're looking for, what they want. But they have a vague sense that their top people are solid, right? And they are planning to figure out the details closer to an exit. They are good operators, they're good business operators. They work hard. They trust their team. And they have at various points told themselves they will deal with this later.
And profile 2 is the owner who has treated retention the way that they treat any other business risk. Okay, they have identified which people are truly critical to the enterprise value. They have put formal structures in place that align those people financially with the outcome of the exit. And by the way, if you can honestly say, I don't think I have anyone that represents that type of risk, and you're attempting to sell a business with $2 million in revenue or more, that's a pretty good indication that you may be spending a little too much time working in your business and not on your business. But that's a topic for another day, and perhaps maybe another
Yes,
webinar.
webinar.
So in this particular case, however, the owner's attorney, their CPA, and their wealth manager are all aware of the plans and have reviewed them from their respective areas of expertise. So when a buyer runs their key person analysis during due diligence, there's a documented answer waiting for them.
And here's the hard truth about being or aligning yourself with profile one. The reality is you've done nothing wrong. Like you've just been running kind of the default playbook, and that default playbook is work hard, trust your people, and deal with the complexity later. Or maybe there's that thing where I just rely on the team to do it when the team's not doing anything at all, meaning your CPA, attorney, etc. Right? And that works fine for operating the business. It does not work well when you're trying to exit the business or grow the enterprise value for an exit to optimize your retirement. And the reason it does not work is that when you get to the exit table, now it's just too late.
Right. And I want to add something here as well that owners often don't anticipate. The due diligence process for a business sale is not just about your financials. Yes, they're important, but it's not the only thing. Sophisticated buyers are going to send their team in to interview key employees in most cases, and sometimes before the deal even closes. Sometimes they'll do it under the cover of an operational review. But they're not just auditing your books. What they're doing is they're auditing your people. And if the key people do not know that they have a stake in this particular outcome, that conversation can go sideways in a hurry.
Yeah, this is something I didn't even realize they did until going and putting the information together, because that is a scenario like me that most owners had never even thought through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly the kind of thing that costs you as the business owner at the table when you have zero time to fix it. Right? So profile two owners have already had that conversation with their key people. They have put agreements in place. They have built alignment. And when the buyer team shows up, the message from the management team is consistent. And it's consistent in the sense that we are committed, we know our role, and we are financially incentivized to see this through. So the question becomes, of these two profiles, which profile do you want to be walking into your exit? And that is the question the VEST protocol is designed to answer.
So let's start with the first layer, the V layer. This is called the valuation impact, because this is where the math lives. And I'm a numbers guy for those that don't know. Most owners think about key employee risk as a people problem. Someone might leave, and that would be disruptive. Of course it would, but they rarely translate that person leaving into a number. So let's do that right now. When a buyer evaluates your business and they're running a stress test, they're asking what happens to revenue if your top salesperson leaves? What happens to operation if a key production manager walks out the door? What happens if happens to client relationships if your lead account manager leaves or retires? And for each of those scenarios, they're also applying a probability and a dollar figure. And here's how that math works on something like this. If a buyer determines that a single key person departure represents, let's say, a 15% revenue risk, and your business generates $3 million in annual revenue, that's $450,000 of at-risk revenue. That's how the buyer is looking at this. And at a 5 times EBITDA multiple, that risk gets translated into a potential discount of $2,250,000 on the purchase price. That's the number or the place from which the buyer begins their negotiations.
That's brutal,
It is.
right? And the thing that John didn't even talk about was like the business didn't change. Your operations didn't change. You didn't do anything
Mhm.
on any of those aspects. Your revenue history didn't change. Right? You could be even having a growth curve up, right? The only thing that changed is what the buyer believes about the fragility of your team. The perception alone, given their math, is worth millions at the exit table.
So the V layer here is about getting honest with yourself about what that number actually is for your business. Not the general idea that key people matter, of course they do, but the actual dollar figure that's sitting on your balance sheet right now as an unmitigated risk.
Okay, so now you have the valuation number in front of you. So the next question is who are you actually designing this for? And this is where most business owners get it wrong, right? The instinct is to be inclusive. I understand that. You want to be fair. You want to reward loyalty. And so most owners tend to design retention plans that cover a wide group of employees. The problem is that retention plan designed for everyone is often optimized for no one. You are spreading resources across a group when the valuation risk is concentrated in 3 or 4 people.
So the E layer here is about making a deliberate strategic decision about who's in the plan and why. And that decision should be driven by one question. Which individuals, if they departed between now and the close of your exit, would materially affect the enterprise value or the deal certainty? That's a very important question to ask and answer. So, and it's also a very different question than who are my best employees. It's also a different question than who has been with me the longest, because valuation risk and tenure are not the same thing. Sometimes your most tenured employee is not who the buyer is most worried about. Sometimes it's the person who's only been with you for 3 years, but may own the primary client relationship, and that can be a big one.
Right. So here's kind of a useful way to think about it. Make a list of your top 10 employees. Then go through that list and ask if this person left today or left the day that I signed an LOI, what would a buyer say about that? What impact would they have on my business? For some of them, the answer is the buyer probably would not blink. They wouldn't care. It's not that big of a deal. For 2 or 3 of them, the answer will be the buyer would renegotiate and potentially walk. And it is those 2 or 3 that should be the eligibility, your list. Those are the ones you should focus on. And that's who this plan should be built for.
I want to add one more dimension to the eligibility that owners sometimes miss. Eligibility design is also about what you're asking people to do to earn the benefit. In other words, a well-designed plan does not just say, stay until the end and you'll get paid. That's not enough. It should define the behaviors or the milestones and sometimes the post-sale commitment that trigger the payout. That level of specificity is what gives the plan teeth and what holds in the buyer's due diligence review.
Okay, so we've gone through the first 2. Now let's get into the layer that has the most moving parts. And I want to be clear that yes, there are 4 up here, but there are a lot of options. We can't possibly go through all of them because then this would be terribly boring. But I want to take some time here because this is also where the most confusion it happens. And this is where the kind of the advisory team needs to be on the same page, right? Because when business owners hear the phrase retention incentive, most oftentimes they immediately think of one of 2 things, either equity or a bonus, right? And both have those instincts, while understandable, are often wrong tool for the job.
So let's walk through the main structures. The first is what's known as a phantom stock plan. And phantom stock gives an employee an economic benefit tied to the value of the business without giving them actual ownership in the company. But here's how it works. You're going to assign a phantom share value based on a formula that's tied to the company performance or perhaps the enterprise value. The employee is going to accrue phantom shares over a vesting period. And when a liquidity event happens, meaning a sale or a recapitalization of the business, the phantom shares pay out in cash based on that formula. And the employees, understand this, the employee never sits at the ownership table and they never have a vote, but they have a direct financial stake in the outcome of your exit. So phantom stock plans are very common with publicly traded companies for that reason. And of course, you can find more information on that just by looking through the SEC filings of some of those companies. They're also very popular and used pretty widely in privately held companies, but of course, they don't have the public disclosures associated with them. So phantom stock is popular with owners who want to create an alignment without diluting their ownership. And it can be structured with something known as cliff vesting, which means the full benefit does not pay out until a specific date or an event occurs, which is useful in tying the people to an exit timeline specifically.
So putting this into perspective from excuse me, from a buyer, when a buyer comes in and finds that your top three people are on a phantom stock plan that vests at close, that is a strong signal. It tells the buyer that your management team has skin in the game, that they are financially aligned with a successful transaction, that they are not going to quietly interview elsewhere while this deal is in process. And that signal has tremendous value.
The second structure is a stock appreciation rights, or SARs. Again, we love acronyms in this industry. SARS is not. Wasn't there a disease?
Yeah, it was like a COVID variation. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So SARs are similar to phantom stocks, but slightly different mechanically. Rather than tying the payout to a formula based on total enterprise value, what SARS does is it pays out based on an increase in company value from a specific baseline. So for example, if your business is valued at, let's say, $10 million today, and your employee has a SARS on a 1% of appreciation, then when the business sells for 14 million, that employee receives $40,000. The upside is tied to the growth from the baseline that the employee helped to create, not just the total value upon exit. So SARs tend to work well for businesses where a baseline valuation is already established and the owner wants to incentivize specific value building activities between now and the time of the exit.
The third structure, or another option here, is a non-qualified deferred compensation. You can see the acronym MQDC or NQDC. I'm not going to say that over and over again. These work obviously differently. So rather than tying compensation to the company value, the non-qualified deferred comp plan allows you to set aside additional compensation for key employees that vests over time according to a schedule that you control. So the employee earns the right to that compensation by staying. And if they leave early, they forfeit it. So, right, the money comes back to you. If they stay through the exit, they receive it. So there's mutually beneficial alignment in creating this non-qualified deferred comp.
So from a tax standpoint, this type of plan, these types of plans have a specific structure. The compensation is not taxable to the employee until it's paid out, which means that you can design the plans where significant payout happens post-exit, aligning the employee's tax event with yours. Now, I want to give you a word of caution here with this type of plan. The specifics of this type of tax treatment can be rather complex. And I highly suggest that your tax advisor needs to be part of the design conversation when you're putting a plan like this together. But the general structure can be very tax efficient for both parties when it's designed correctly.
Another option here is long-term incentive plans, the LTIPs. On a complete side note, I actually had a client, his LTIP paid out, which was a sizable chunk. And I think it was, 7 or 8 years that it had been accumulating. So there's that. Um, so the LTIPs are more flexible than the structure, right, that we just described. An LTIP is essentially a multi-year compensation framework that combines elements of performance bonuses, deferred compensation, and sometimes equity like payouts. So the design varies significantly from business to business, but the core logic is the same. You are building a compensation structure that rewards people for staying, for hitting specific milestones, and for contributing to the outcome that you care the most about, which is the sell of your business. So here's an honest summary of this S layer. There is no single right structure for your business, right? The right structure for your business depends on your ownership goals, your tax situation, your exit timeline, and the specific people you are designing it for. And this is why having a team that's working together helps create this clarity that you're looking for to put all these pieces together. Because what matters is that you are making a deliberate choice based on all the factors rather than defaulting to whatever a single attorney or a single CPA either advised you or drafted at that time.
So here's a scenario that illustrates what the absence of this S layer can cost a business owner. I'm going to call this person Rachel. And Rachel was the CFO for a manufacturing business with about an $18 million in annual revenue. She had been with the company for 9 years. The owner had a strong relationship with her and genuinely believed that she would stay through the exit. About 14 months before the LOI was signed, Rachel got a call from a larger competitor offering her a base salary 30% higher than what she currently had, plus a formal equity stake in the new company. And the owner of Rachel's company had never put any formal retention structure in place for her. So there was no financial tie or incentive to the exit. There was no vesting schedule. There was goodwill, a good salary, and a verbal promise that she would be taken care of at the end. And all of that is nice, but it wasn't enough. So Rachel left the company. She gave a professional 2 weeks notice. She was not trying to hurt anybody by any means, but she was doing what any rational professional would do when presented with a significantly better opportunity. And here's what happened to the deal. The buyer's team came in during due diligence, and one of their very first questions was, who handles your financial reporting, your banking relationships, and your working capital management? And the answer that they received was, well, we're sort of in transition right now. The buyer immediately renegotiated the sales price, and they took the price down by approximately 20%. The owner had estimated to close roughly $9 million. And the sale eventually did close, but it closed at 7.2 million instead. That's a $1.8 million that walked out the door with Rachel.
Now, John and I talked about this before we jumped on here about most advisors are soft gloved. And so we talked about being punchy. So I want to be punchy right now and very direct, because in this scenario, most business owners would play the victim role. I gave everything to Rachel. She left. I did everything. But the reality is she's not the problem. She did absolutely nothing wrong. She had every right to take the better opportunity. The owner's mistake was not having a plan. Your mistake as a business owner is not having something in writing that both people can agree upon. This is not this thing that I did everything for them and why did they leave me? No, they left you because you weren't clear. They left you because there wasn't a mutually beneficial alignment to what they wanted and what you wanted. So the upside is this is a very solvable problem. It just needs to be solved before somebody has interest in your business. It needs to be solved before somebody like this individual leaves your business. And so with that, I want to get off the punchy train for a second, or the soapbox, if you will. And I want to do this exercise with you that we talk about at the top here. And so whether you're watching this, driving, or I hope you're not driving. I don't know why I said that. But just mentally do this exercise with us, right? Because the first step is think of the 3 people in your business who, if they left tomorrow, would cause you the most serious operational disruption or impact your revenue. Just name 3, right? Okay, so write them down, hold them, remember them. Step 2, for each of these 3 people, assign a rough percentage. If the person left tomorrow, what percentage of your revenue or operational capacity would be immediately affected and at risk? And maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 30. It's not necessarily a precise number. We're not mathematically doing these based off of valuation. It's just a rough estimate. Think about it, right? A gut number for each of these 3. And then here in step 3, add those 3 percentages together, right? And we're going to call that your key person dependency score, right? So if your score is under 20%, your dependency risk is relatively distributed. Like obviously you still want to plan, but you have some runway. If your score is between 20 and 40%, you have a material concentration risk that a buyer is going to notice. And if your score is above 40%, I mean, that's just a significant valuation risk, and you need to do something about it, because the buyer is going to price that risk. They are going to price it aggressively, and you're not going to get the maximum value for your business when you decide to exit. And so most business owners that we work with are surprised by their own score, because they have been thinking about retention as a relationship problem, not a math problem. And so now you have a number. So hold on to it, because the next layer, the T layer of the VEST protocol, is where that number gets addressed. Okay. So before we jump into that, just another case study here. We're going to call him David. David ran a professional services firm, solid business, about 4 million in EBITDA. 4 people who were generally critical to the enterprise. 2 of them managed the primary client relationships. 1 of them was his operations lead, and 1 was a technical specialist who was essentially irreplaceable in the short term. Now, David came to us about 22 months before he wanted to go to market, which, by the way, most owners don't do this. They wait until like 2 months instead of 22. And so we kind of went through this process. We put a number on what each of these 4 people represented in terms of a buyer risk. And collectively, the unmitigated exposure was significant. And the number got David's attention pretty quickly in a way that the general concept of retention risk never had. And so here is the T layer part of this. His attorney drafted the agreements. Obviously, a CPA reviewed the tax structure of each of the plans. And then what John and I reviewed the entire package against his exit timeline and his personal financial goals. All 4 advisors had seen the full picture before a single agreement was signed.
Yeah, so when David went to market 18 months later, every one of those 4 people was still in place. They were still at the business. The buyer's team came in and interviewed all 4 of them, and every single one of them communicated very clearly that they were financially invested in the outcome. And not only that, they were also committed to the transition. So that deal closed at full multiple. There was no discount for key person risk. It was a very clean close. And David told me afterwards that the 22 months of preparation felt very, very slow at the time, kind of one of those hurry up and wait type situations we've experienced from time to time. But sitting on the other side of the close, once the deal had closed, it felt to David more like what he said was the best 22 months that he'd ever spent. So the T layer is team alignment. the one that most business owners skip, not because they disagree with it, because it requires something more complicated than signing an agreement. It requires your advisors to actually talk to one another. That's that silo effect that Mike and I have talked about in previous webinars over and over again. Here is what team alignment means in practice. So if your attorney drafts the retention agreement, your CPA will then review the tax treatment of each plan. Your wealth manager understands how the expected payouts affect your personal financial plan and your post-exit liquidity. Those are all very, very important steps. And whoever's coordinating the exit strategy has a view of the entire picture so that no one plan conflicts with another. So instead, what we see most often is some version of the attorney drafts the phantom stock plan. It's a good plan legally in and of itself, but the payout schedule perhaps creates an unexpected tax event for the owner at exactly the wrong time. Or the NQDC plan has a deferred compensation that conflicts with the post-exit investment strategy that the wealth manager has been building towards. Here's another example. The retention agreements can sometimes have terms that a buyer's counsel flags during due diligence because they were not written with the transition in mind. Now, once again, none of those outcomes happen because someone made a mistake. They happen because the advisors were each doing their job in their own lane, or perhaps their own silo, as we like to say, without a shared view of the finish line. Okay, we're all looking at it from a different perspective, and I guess you could say that in and of itself was the mistake. The advisors simply were just not coordinated and communicating over this.
And we want to be clear, you guys. We're not saying that you don't have good advisors. We've talked about this time and time again. They could be very, very good, highly qualified advisors, right? That's not the question. The question is whether they're actually communicating and who's responsible for that communication. Now, option one is that you could be, as the business owner, could be responsible for that communication. But then again, you're running a business. You've already got multiple hats. You don't need another responsibility. So then who is part of that team that you are comfortable with in assigning that role to be that coordination layer? And this is kind of the idea for the National Referral Network and why it was built. It's not built necessarily to replace your advisors. It's to help you coordinate them and fill the gaps of the advisors that you don't need, right? There's cost segregation. There's all kinds of advisors that you haven't even thought about because your other advisors don't want to work friendly with other advisors. That's just the reality of it. And so we want to make sure that the left hand is talking to the right hand and that everybody's working together for the best possible outcome for you, not for them, for you. I think I went far enough on that one, John. I keep beating these points, John. So because that's the reality, right? Like, you built your business over the years of compounding what you felt were good decisions, and your exit should not come down to poorly coordinated retention agreements that nobody caught. Okay. So catch my breath here for a second. So let's summarize what we covered today. The VEST protocol has a 4-layer framework. You have the valuation impact, understand the actual dollar figure your key person dependency represents to a buyer. The eligibility design, identify specific people, 2 to 4 of them in most cases, whose departure would materially affect deal certainty or enterprise value. Structure selection. Choose the right plan architecture for each person based on your ownership goals, tax picture, and exit timeline. And then the 4th layer we just went over extensively, which is the team alignment, making sure your attorney, your CPA, your wealth advisor, and any other person you need part of that conversation on the same page, making sure that they're reviewing the plan together and that they're all working from that same financial plan, the same exit plan, the same playbook that you have basically bought in on and signed off on.
So, Mike, I just want to talk briefly about the cost of inaction here. I think it's easy to leave here today feeling like, I've learned something useful, and then put this on the shelf or put it on the list of things to do later. So here's what later can cost. The owners who wait until they have a letter of intent in hand to think about retention have, in our experience, the least leverage and the least amount of time to fix the problem. By that point, your key employees are either already aware that a transaction is in motion, or they're about to find out, and they become a little bit nervous at that point. So you can still put plans in place, but you're doing it under a time crunch or time pressure with less negotiating room with the buyers watching very often. So that is the most expensive version of this conversation to have. The owners who put plans in place, however, 12 to 24 months before their target exit date, they have the time to design them correctly and the flexibility to adjust them if circumstances change along the way, and they'll have the ability to let the plans do their job before the exit process actually begins. That timing difference, in our experience, tends to show up in the quality of the close, aka the net proceeds.
Now, going through this, we've talked about the 12, 24 months before exit, or just in general before exit. But I want to kind of lay this out. If you're starting a business today, or you're 1 year into your business, do this process. Don't wait until some point in the future, like, hey, I'm not going to exit this thing for 20 years. The reality is you don't know. If somebody came and cut you a check tomorrow for the figure that you're looking for, the question is would you take it? And it doesn't matter if you're 1, 2, 3, 20 years into your business. The time to prepare to sell the business is today. So if this is landing for you, which I hope it is, and you're the kind of owner who wants to walk into your exit with a coordinated plan rather than a collection of well-intentioned agreements that like nobody cross-checked, that is exactly the conversation we have with the value gap assessment. And at the start of today, I told you we had 2 goals. The first goal was to give you something generally useful. And I hope that the VEST protocol delivered on that, and going through that little exercise kind of shed some light on that dark corner that nobody ever looks in, right? Because goal 2 was that if we delivered, we're going to ask you to take the next step, because we don't want, like John just talked about, the cost of inaction. We are about taking action. Whatever that action is, move forward in that action. And now is the time to honor that part of the deal. Okay. So the next step, as we mentioned, is a complimentary value gap assessment. And here's what it looks like. It's a working conversation. It is not a pitch. It's not a sales call. We're going to spend some time understanding your business, your timeline, maybe start establishing a timeline. That'd be a good start. Who's on your advisory team and where the gaps are. And then we're going to tell you honestly what we think the right next step is, and who the right person or people that you need to talk to get you on track to be in alignment with what you want to do in your exit.
And it's important for you to know that during this value gap assessment, who we are, which I think we've covered at great length, but also it's important to know who we're not. And we are not valuation experts. So we're not certified exit planners, and we're not attorneys or CPAs. What we are is the coordination layer. We're the team that ensures that your attorney, your CPA, your wealth manager, and any other specialist that you need along the way are working from the same exit goal or the same exit timeline, instead of in their own lanes or their own silos, like we keep saying. That's the role that we play, and it's a role that most business owners, unfortunately, do not have filled. So the call, again, is a discovery conversation, and we're listening in this conversation more than we're talking. We want to understand your business well enough to know which of our strategic partners is a right fit for you where you are right now, and how to get from where you are to where you want to go. Sometimes that's an exit planning specialist. Sometimes it's a specific type of tax advisor. Sometimes it's a retention attorney who has done the exact work in your industry. But understand, we do not have a single solution that we're pointing everyone toward. We're matching you to the right resource for the specific situation. And none of that is to say that we want to replace your existing advisors. We don't. We have talked about that several times in previous webinars. So I'm not going to get into that here, but you can go back and listen to those webinars on our YouTube channel at Avior Wealth Management.
That was a good plug, John, for the channel.
Thank you.
And I want to add to what John was saying, because I want to be very clear, and I want you to hear this. This conversation is about taking action. You'll leave that conversation knowing who you should talk to in the next step and what that conversation should focus on. That is a deliverable. And I will tell you that most of the professionals that we work with, we have the calendar links. So when we talk about taking action, this isn't going to be sending an email and then hoping you connect with the professional that we're going to introduce you to. We're literally going to schedule a call between you and the professional while we're talking. And most oftentimes, if the schedule fits, one of us will be on that conversation to make that introduction. So if we make that scheduled call, we're going to ask you to be there. Okay? Because when we contact our professionals that we work with, they know that you are ready to have that conversation. Not saying you're ready to engage in any sort of commitment or any sort of agreement to work with that professional, but you have at least made the commitment to take the action to meet with them, right? So we want to be clear with you. This is an actionable step. It's not one of these hypothetical sending emails back and forth. Hey, do you want to do this or not? No, it's either yes or a no.
Yeah, we're talking about something incredibly important to you, which is your business and your future. So you should know that the network that Mike's talking about, that we have built, exists specifically for this very reason. These are professionals that we've vetted, that we've worked with, and trust to handle situations like the ones that we've discussed today, and many, many others. That is not a small thing when the stakes are a multi-million-dollar exit.
So if you want to book that conversation, scan the QR code you see on the screen. If you're watching the recording of this or you're on your phone, just take a note of the URL below the QR code. It will take you to the calendar. You'll know it's the right calendar because it'll say Golden Handcuffs, which is basically the name of this webinar. But please schedule the time, if nothing more, to get the information you need to make the best educated decision for your business. But before we wrap, a quick review of what's coming in webinar 8. We're going to be talking about the pre-sale audit, specifically how to identify and fix what we call deal killers before they show up in a buyer's due diligence review. So if you've ever wondered what a buyer actually sees or wants to see when they look under the hood of your business, that is the session. So the registration link will be on John and I's LinkedIn profiles later this afternoon, so look out for that. Register for that webinar.
And lastly, if today's session has raised any questions that you want answered before webinar 8, the value gap assessment is the right place for that conversation. We'll see you there.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.